Good morning, everyone. So today I'm here to oppose the proposition of the Death with Dignity Act to be nationwide throughout the U.S. to be legal. I first want to make mention of the fact that right now, currently, except for the state of Oregon, the physician-assisted suicide is not legal. Quoted in the article Physician-Assisted Suicide, Legality and Mortality by Martin Levin, he stated that the United States Supreme Court granted certiorari review and in a unanimous opinion reversed the Ninth Circuit decision concluding that a person does not have a constitutional right to physician-assisted suicide, and thus the Washington state law forbidding this act is unconstitutional. The Washington Act to legalize physician-assisted suicide in the state went against the Ninth Circuit to make it legal, but the Supreme Court has the constitutional right and the autonomy to declare that they have the right to say who and who does not get to have that privilege. And in that same article, he addresses that in this interest, both courts acknowledge that a state has an interest in preserving life in general, preventing deaths that occur as a result of errors in medical or legal judgment, preventing exercise of undue, arbitrary, and or unfair influences over an individual's decision to end his or her life, and safeguarding interests of innocent third parties and minor children and other family members. This is all to ensue if physician-assisted suicide were declared a fundamental right. Furthermore, in that article, Martin Levin mentions that to recognize a fundamental right to physician-assisted suicide, we would have to reverse centuries of legal doctrine and practice and strike down the considered policy choice of almost every state. And as my opponent mentioned just before me, that there are patients who are suffering for years and months of their terminal illness. It is mentioned that those who do qualify and who choose to die by assisted suicide generally end their lives approximately 3 weeks before their natural death would have occurred. So it's false that people are waiting months and years to just sitting in agony to waiting to die, when in reality, on average, they just have 3 more weeks of their life left, and not in all cases are they all suffering. Physician-assisted suicide also removes the moral barrier against suicide and homicide. Jane St. Clair made mention in her 30 Logical Reasons Against Suicide that Oregon's suicide rate is now 35 times the national rate. It had been declining before voters in Oregon made assisted suicide legal, thus making all suicides socially acceptable. So here it makes mention that now that the physician-assisted suicide is legal in Oregon, that it has desensitized Oregon residents of what death is and those committing suicide naturally, other than physician-assisted suicide, is a normal thing that's going on in the state of Oregon now. And furthermore, PAS, physician-assisted suicide, has influenced teens to commit suicide. Jane St. Clair also makes mention that the teen suicide rate increased since assisted suicide was legalized in Washington and Oregon. By okaying assisted suicide laws, we're telling all our teenagers that suicide is okay and necessary sometimes. So we see it from mostly adults with terminal illness, now moving on into the young teenagers, to seeing their role models and ideal people who they look up to, seeing death and suicide especially as something a little more normal. And when presented the choice of physician-assisted suicide, patients will feel trapped in choosing life or death. In an article from the Vermont Alliance for Ethical Healthcare, Marilyn Golden states that given the absence of any real choice, death by assisted suicide becomes not an act of personal autonomy, but an act of desperation. It is fictional freedom. It is phony autonomy. And most patients with terminal illness don't feel that death is truly what they want. They just feel like if they have the chance to say what happens in how they die, that they feel that their autonomy is more important than what their life is really worth. And one more thing that I would like to mention is that patients already have life choices on life or death. In an article, as I mentioned earlier, from Physician Assisted Suicide on its legality and mortality, he quotes, "If a patient does wish to die after appropriate counseling and treatment, the patient has the legal right to have withdrawn or withheld life-sustaining procedures, such as nutrition and hydration, and receive pain medication and sedatives to make the process of dying more comfort." And that is known as physician-assisted death, which is different from the physician-assisted suicide, where those with cancer patients have the right to choose that they wish to no longer have their chemotherapy treatment, and they have the right to be withdrawn from that. Rather than just choosing suicide, you can choose to be taken off any medication and just die a more natural way. Thank you.